is June 9th, 2008. I am Cassie Potasic, and it is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Beulah, North Dakota. Can you please tell me your full name?
My name is Hilda Melita Lindemann Backfish.
When and where were you born?
I was born in the two-room farmhouse north of Golden Valley, about 5 miles north of Golden Valley, on February 22nd, 1928.
Have you ever heard an interesting story about your birth?
No, I haven't. Things were not talked about in those days. I was delivered by a midwife, if that's interesting.
Right. Then, go ahead.
I was delivered by Mrs. Georg Lindemann, who was an aunt of my dad's. She lived in Golden Valley. She was a popular midwife then.
All right. Can you share some of your earliest memories with us?
Well, I remember that times were bad. That was the start of the Depression. In the dirty 30s, we called them, because the dirt was everywhere, dust blowing every day. I have a lot of memories of growing up. We were poor, but so was everybody else, so you didn't think you were different than anyone else. But we lived on a farm. We always had enough to eat. My mother was a good cook, and we raised a lot of our own vegetables and meat and milk and butter. So we were pretty self-sufficient. About all we had to buy was flour, sugar, coffee, things like that.
Do you remember any dust storms?
Oh yes, I remember the dust storms. They were so bad sometimes that we had to light the kerosene lamp in the daytime. It got so dark in the house. And the dishes in the cupboards were dusty. Mom had to dust them off when she brought them to the table, and it seeped in under the windows and the doors, and we had to lay wet cloths in the cracks of the bottoms of the windows and the doors, and everything was dusty. If you would hang wash out on the line and you had to watch for the big dark clouds to come, you had to bring in your wash before they would get dirty from the dust blowing, and the grasshoppers, they were everywhere. All the fence rows were covered with them, and when Dad came home from the fields, the wagons were covered, and he had us catch chickens and put them up in the wagon box to eat the grasshoppers. And they would they'd come in the house too. They'd ride in on your shoulders or on your clothes, or if you left the door open a little too long, they would come in. And sometimes the grasshoppers were so thick you could look up at the sun. It would just blot out the sun. You could watch the big hordes of grasshoppers come over, and they ate everything that was green. It wasn't much that grew, but what did, they managed to eat it. It was great raising turkeys then, because and ducks, they loved to eat the grasshoppers, and all day they would be out in the fields and the prairies getting the grasshoppers, eating the grasshoppers.
Right. Do you remember the WPA?
Yes, my dad worked for the WPA for a while. And he usually got paid in commodities like rice, grapefruit, raisins, flour. And that was the Work Progress Administration. It was part of Roosevelt's New Deal, and it was really a good deal for people that were trying to hang on to the farm and trying to make a living. And if you had a team of horses, and they could use them in the work they were doing, like building roads and so on, you got a few dollars a day more if you had horses that you would take to work with you. And they did build a road west of our place, the main road to town, They worked on that. And that's how you earned a few dollars or food to anyway. And then there was the NYA, the National Youth Administration, where they employed women and girls, and they would sew clothes for people. And I still remember a couple of dresses I had that they made. They were very favorite dresses of mine. And I remember I had an aunt that lived in Golden Valley that worked for the NYA. And then there were the CCC camps where the young boys would be encamped, and they would plant trees and build outhouses in the different towns and establish parks for people to enjoy. I know there's still a log cabin setting in Golden Valley Park that the CCC boys built. It used to be about 1.5 miles southwest of Golden Valley, but later on when they established a park in town, they moved it into town. And it's still an original one that was built by the CCC boys. That was the Civilian Conservation Corps. That was another part of the New Deal. And I think the family got about $18 a month, I think, that was sent home to the family. And the CCC boys got a few dollars out of that, I don't know, $5 or $6 a month or whatever. But it was a good deal all around for keeping them occupied. And some would hop freight trains and go out to Montana and work in the beet fields, or go to the state of Washington to pick apples, anything to make a few dollars to keep the farm going and keep the family going. And I appreciate my dad. A lot of people lost their farms in those days because they would mortgage the cattle, the farm, whatever, machinery, whatever they had, and they couldn't pay the mortgages back, so a lot of them lost their farms. But my dad was able to hang on to the farm, and I appreciate him being a good enough manager to do that. Of course, we all worked hard. The mom worked hard, and the kids worked hard, and so we managed to hang on to the farm.
Right. Is there anything else you remember about the Dirty 30s?
Well, I remember that cattle, there was no feed for cattle, so they used to have to feed them thistles, the green thistles, and they had quite a bit of nourishment in them. And but they were very laxative. And when we'd milk, you had to be careful. If a cow stood a certain way, you knew what was happening. The thistles had gone through the system and were ready to leave the cow, so you had to move fast because they would shoot from one side of the barn to the other, sometimes 8-10 feet. And if 2 cows let go at the same time, you could get caught in the crossfire. We laugh about it now. It wasn't funny then, and some of the cows were on the verge of starvation, so the government would pay, I don't know, $6 or $7 a head, and they would come out and shoot them. And of course, my sister and I, we loved our cows. They all had names, and when they came out to our farm and shot several cows, Dad had to decide whether he'd let them starve to death or get a few dollars for them. We stood behind the barn and cried our little hearts out when they shot those cows. It was sad. And the worst part of it was they didn't use the cows then. They just left them. They could have used them to feed the poor people that didn't have anything to eat. I often think now, why did they do that? But I suppose they didn't have the facilities or refrigeration and so on to keep them, so they were just a waste. So sometimes they would get beet pulp from Montana after they processed sugar beets. They would feed that to cattle. And my dad, they used to get big barrels of molasses and mix that with straw or thistles, and it was nourishing for the cows, and they would eat it. I remember him doing that, mixing molasses with some of the stuff that did manage to grow. and feed that to cattle. I remember I had a cat that fell in the molasses barrel one time, and it was in the winter time. It was so stiff, and she couldn't get out, and I pulled her out of this molasses, and she couldn't clean herself up. There was too much on. So one day when my mother was washing clothes in the washing machine, she said, "Bring me your cat." And she put her in a gunny sack and swished her around in the warm soapy water and pulled the bag out, and the cat came out clean. So I was happy that she got the cat cleaned up. I felt so sorry. I tried to wash the cat and everything, and I couldn't get her clean.
Can you tell me about your mother's wash machine?
Yes, well, she used to wash by hand. Sheets, overalls, everything. She'd scrub them on a scrub board by hand. And later on, Dad bought her washing machine with a gasoline motor on it. And sometimes it balked, but they eventually got it started, and that was a godsend. Mom didn't have to scrub the clothes by hand. So she washed them in that machine and had the rinse tub next to it, and she had a wringer on it. She didn't have to wring out the clothes by hand anymore. So she would rinse the clothes and put them through the wringer again and hang them out to dry. Didn't need any electricity then. We didn't have it yet. Later on, when we got electricity, then she got an electric washing machine, but never had an automatic. She never wanted one later on.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about the Dirty 30s?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of things. I kind of wrote it out in that report. If I had that here, I could look at that. I'd remember some more things. Oh, I remember Dad working for the WPA, and Mom selling cream and eggs and butchered chickens and butchered pigeons, and people in town would buy them. And she helped a lot of the relatives by giving them cream and eggs and chickens to carry them through. We went barefoot mostly all summer and got a new pair of shoes when school started. And clothes, we didn't have clean clothes every day, but Mom kept them mended, and for school we usually got 1 or 2 new dresses maybe. We had to wear dresses to school in those days yet.
Were they handmade or store-bought?
Both. Either they were altered from someone else's clothes that had outgrown them, or Mom sewed them. Not too often we got store-bought dresses. Later on we did.
All right. Is there anything else about that era that you'd like to share with us?
Well, they were hard times, but when you think back, they were very good times because we learned some very valuable lessons. I think if times got bad, we old-timers could survive, but young people, I don't know if they could. We learned to use things until they were worn out and made do with what we had, and we didn't desire so many of the things, like they weren't available to us. They hadn't been invented yet, like television and fast cars and all that. So we learned a lot of valuable lessons about being thrifty, saving your money, not spending it foolishly, wearing clothes, whether they were in style or not, that didn't make any difference to us. And doing jobs we hated doing, we stuck with them until they were done. We had perseverance and persistence, and families were much closer. They did everything together. Nowadays, everybody's going in another direction, and they hardly ever eat together anymore, where we had 3 meals a day and we had them together. And we worked out in the fields together, and whatever we did, chores and so on, the family worked together, and we learned a lot of valuable lessons that way. Cooperation, and families were very important in those days. And so were neighbors. Neighbors spent a lot of time together. That was their entertainment. If they could spend an evening visiting and enjoying each other, that was a great time for them. Now families don't do that anymore because everybody's time is their time, and they're involved in their sports and TV programs, and it didn't used to be that way.
How far away was the closest neighbor when you were growing up?
Oh, about a mile and a half, and there were lots of neighbors. Now there's nobody out there anymore. It used to be neighbors all around, and they always helped each other out and were interested in what their fellow man was doing.
How often did neighbors come to visit?
Oh, they usually did that in the wintertime, mostly, when they had to hitch up horses to the sleigh and bundle up the family, put some hay in the bottom of the sleigh, and put some quilts and blankets in, and they heated up rocks to put your feet on to keep your feet warm, and they would drive to the neighbors with a team of horses, and probably midnight when they got home sometimes. They just enjoyed visiting.
And would they do anything besides just visit?
Well, some people like to play cards. I don't remember as a kid that we did that very much, but some families played cards a lot. We usually had board games like checkers, Chinese checkers, that was very popular.
What other games did you play?
Oh, we usually played tag, or in the wintertime we'd play fox and goose. We'd make these big rings out in the snow, and somebody was the fox and the rest were geese, and they tried to get back to the base before the fox caught them, and we played Pum Pum Pull Away. It was a popular game when we went to school. I Spy was popular in the wintertime. You would say, I see something that's red and black and white, and you'd have to guess what it was. Or we would hide something. It had to show just a little bit and see who could find it first. We played hide and seek a lot too. I'm sure there were other games I can't think of right now.
Right. Well, you've mentioned your family quite a few times. So can you tell me about your grandparents?
I never knew any of my grandparents, and I think I missed a lot in life by never knowing my grandparents. They were all my mother's parents were all in Germany, and my father's parents in Ukraine, and none of them ever came to the United States, so I had no relationship with my grandparents. I'm sorry to say.
Did you ever hear any stories about them?
Well, about my dad's parents, I know they had a hard life growing up in Russia when times were bad, and especially during World War I and World War II, there was great starvation there, and when the Germans lost all their rights, the Germans that had gone to Russia lost all their rights, such as not being taxed and keep their own religion and their own language, their own customs, and the young men were never to have gone to any Russian army. They started taking those rights away from the Germans. And then my dad's parents were all sent up to Siberia to the slave labor camps. and they had a very hard life up there. They were there until 1960, and then they were sent to Kazakhstan, and then they were in Kazakhstan till 1990, when Russia fell apart. And then they said if the Germans, if they could prove their German heritage, they could come back to Germany. So they have all made their way back to Germany, and they're living a good life now.
All right.
And my mother's family, my mother was from Germany. They had a very hard time during World War II also, because they were all behind the Iron Curtain under communist rule. And my mother would pack up boxes of the foods they could send. There wasn't too many they could send, and clothes. And my dad would too send to his family in Russia, and my mother would send to her family in Germany, and they say that's what kept them going. And then there was also a company in New York that my dad would send money to, and they would give flour and rice and things like that to families in Russia for depending on how much money you sent them. It was sort of a food company that would do that. But they had to go to Odessa to pick all that up all the time.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your grandparents?
No, just that I wish I would have known them. I have pictures of my mother's parents, and of my father's mother, but I've never seen a picture of my dad's dad.
Right. And did you know any of your aunts and uncles growing up?
Well, two of my dad's brothers came to the United States when he did, and another brother that lived in Germany after the war, we paid for his fare and had him come over to visit for a few weeks. But my dad had already died by that time, so he never got to see his brother. And I didn't get to see any of the rest of the family. But I know their children. I have visited them, and some have been here to visit me in the United States. And my mother's family, I have met her two nieces and a sister-in-law, but I never met any of her siblings either. The time we went over there, her sister died about 3 weeks or whatever before we got there. So it wasn't even that long. It was about 6 days before we got there, so I never got to see. I was hoping to see a blood relative from either side, and she had died before we got there.
Do you have any stories about any of your aunts and uncles that you'd like to share?
Well, my Uncle Fred, who was the oldest one in that family, he farmed north of Golden Valley. And he is deceased, of course. And my Uncle Ed, he was married and lived in Golden Valley and had his family, and they eventually moved to Billings, Montana. And he died in 1985, so he was the last one left of the people that came to America.
All right. Can you tell me about your father?
Well, my father was 21 when he came to the United States. He had tried to come to America before, and that was when Russia didn't let these young men leave because they wanted them for the army. Well, I think my dad thought if he stays in Russia and gets inducted into the Russian army, he'd have to shoot at Germans because they were at war with Germany. And so he escaped Russia, but he was caught at the border and sent back to Russia, and he was imprisoned for 3 months. And when he got out, he took his younger brother, Edward, and tried it again. to come to America, and they had sort of an underground of Jews that you paid them so much money and they would get you from point A to point B and so on. And they had to hide in the daytime and traveled at night, and they had to hide in haystacks, and it was quite an adventure getting into Germany then. But they made it. They had to have their fare paid for, so Germany wouldn't be filled with these guys trying to escape and no place to put them. So they had to have their fare paid for. And he said his mother cried so when he took Edward with him because, well, my dad told me he was 14 or 15 at the time, but according to the manifest of the ship, it says he was 17. Maybe he lied about his age so he could come. And Dad promised he would take good care of Edward. Well, they got separated somewhere in Russia or Germany, and my dad said, I felt so bad, I promised Mother I'd take good care of him, and now Edward was gone. But when he got into Germany, he met a wagon with a man and a woman, and they had Edward seated in between them. They had picked him up somewhere along the way, so my dad was very relieved that he had found Edward again. And then they came over here, and they had to have a sponsor in the United States, someone that would meet him and be responsible for him. And the railroad hadn't come into North Dakota yet, so they went to this uncle's place in South Dakota, in Parkston, South Dakota. And they were there for a while, and then they came north into North Dakota and started working for farmers to get a little start. And my dad worked for Gotthilf Isaac. His wife was a cousin of my dad's, and he got enough money to buy a quarter of land from Gotthilf Isaac, and my Uncle Fred and Dad farmed on that land for a while, and Edward did too, I guess. Then as they got more money, they bought another quarter of land, and pretty soon the others, Fred bought his own place, and my Uncle Ed lived in Golden Valley. He had a garage there. He was a good mechanic and took care of everybody's vehicles and machines and stuff. So that's how they got their start. But they just had a few dollars in their pocket when they got to the United States.
Can you tell me what kind of person he was?
Who, my father? Well, he was very strict with us children. We got some of the whippings that you wouldn't believe. And when one of us got a licking, we all got it. He could think of things we did 2 weeks ago that, so that we could all get a licking at one time. But still, he was a good father. He taught us many valuable lessons, too. Mom was kind of the softy, and he often chided her about making softies out of us kids. Mother never spanked us. She left that to Dad, and we used to say, all Mom had to say, I'm going to tell Dad when he comes home. Well, that was enough to really settle us down. And we'd say, oh, Mom, please, you do the spanking. You don't hit so hard. But she told Dad on us, and boy, that's all it took us to shape us up. That was we were raised the European way, I guess. A man said, my dad always said, if you love your family, you discipline them. You don't just let them run wild. You take care of that right away. So we feared Dad's hand, let's put it that way. I think nowadays they'd call that child abuse. They'd call the welfare and report their parents if they whipped them like we used to get whipped. But all the kids did, you know. There wasn't anybody that wasn't raised that way. We remembered it the second time. But sometimes an accident happened, you know, but you still got it, so you were more careful the next time. We couldn't afford to waste anything, so if we broke a window or something, woofda. We were careful not to break the next one.
Can you describe your relationship with your father?
Like I say, we didn't pull anything over on Dad. And yet he was good about taking us kids somewhere or experiencing new things. He loved to read. He learned to read English and speak it. He was liked politics. He could sit up all night and argue politics with someone. I remember on the 4th of July, he always says, "Where do you kids want to go today?" He would take us anywhere we wanted to go. That was a big deal to him, was the 4th of July. Mom would say, "I'll stay home and milk the cows. You go ahead and go." And sometimes we didn't get home till, I remember one time there was a big carnival at Zap, and we didn't get home till daylight. Mom was just going after the milk cows the next morning. I don't know, my dad liked people. He liked to visit and, like I say, talk politics or whatever came up. He enjoyed that.
What was his profession?
A farmer.
And how did he cope with hard times?
Well, like I say, everybody else was in the same boat, so you didn't feel so sorry for yourself because that's just the way it was. They accepted things. Nowadays, you got so many things that you have to keep going and make payments on that it worries you, you know, when the money isn't there. But they didn't have all those things to worry about.
Right. Can you tell me when, where, and how your father died?
He died at home very suddenly. Mom and Dad had moved to Golden Valley when he retired from farming, which was about in 1957, because my younger brother and his wife took over the farm. And we still don't know if it was a stroke or a heart attack. Without an autopsy, it's impossible to tell, and we just never had that done. So it was very suddenly at home. And he could have never stood it if he'd had a stroke and had to be in a wheelchair or something. So for him, I'm glad he went that way.
Right then.
And he was 74 years old. But he went out to the farm every day to help with haying, whatever there needed to be done, because he always missed the farm, and my mother did too. She missed it even more than my dad.
Well, can you tell us about your mother?
Well, she was a mail-order bride from Germany. My dad knew this Pastor Heipel. He used to be from Hebron. He was going to they went to school together in Russia. And then Pastor Heipel went to Germany to go to the seminary. And his wife and my mother worked in a home for refugees. That was after the First World War. And my dad had come to America when he was 21. That was in 1914. But he still corresponded with Rudolf Heipel in Germany. And my dad was then 30 years old, and I don't know if he wanted to keep the bloodline pure or why he wanted a wife from Germany. But he wrote to Pastor Heipel and said, "Could you find a girl for me in Germany?" And Pastor Heipel wrote back, and he said, "Oh, I've got just the girl for you." And that was my mother. So my dad sent her ship fare over because the Heipels were coming to the United States, and they were going to bring her along. And they did. My mother left all her relatives, her family. She couldn't speak a word of English. I thought it was quite daring, or was she desperate, or what? I don't know, that she would do that. But things in Germany were bad. Whoever could leave would leave then, and so my mother came out here to the prairies of North Dakota. She was a city gal. And what a shock she was in for. With thunderstorms and blizzards, she often thought the world was coming to an end. She had never seen anything like that before. And she was homesick. She said she cried a lot the first 2 years or so, and then the baby started to come, and there was a lot of work. The work is what saved me, she said. But people didn't marry for the kind of love they get married for now. This was the kind that usually came after living together and raising a family and going through hard times. And those marriages were more solid, I think, than they are nowadays. After a few years, love has flown out the window and there isn't much left. But they got married for different reasons in those days, and I think that's why. They thought of murder often, but divorce never, I'm sure. But I think if there'd have been a bridge across the Atlantic Ocean, my mother probably would have walked back to Germany because it was tough. And she left a family. She was the oldest of 5 children. And her mother died when she was about 9 years old. And her dad remarried, and she just never accepted the kids, so they left home at a very early age and worked or were taken in by other families or by relatives. And then when my mother was 21 is when she came to the United States. My dad was then 30 years old. So he married late in life, but he still had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. And built up a farm, acquired more land, and did all right. Just by the sweat of his brow.
Can you tell us what kind of person your mother was?
She was a true German, the type that, a true German thinks their mission in life is to work themselves to death. And I think my mother really, really tried. But she lived to be 99 years and 4 months old. And she says that was because she worked so hard it kept her fit. And she made the best farmer's wife. She was a city gal from Germany, but she made the best farmer's wife. There wasn't a thing she wouldn't tackle, from picking rocks to pitching hay to raising poultry, milking cows, anything. But she didn't like to work with machinery because she didn't grow up with it. She never drove a car. I know in the wintertime when she and Dad were alone and he couldn't get the car started, he had her drive the tractor one time and to pull the car, and she almost jerked the car into pieces, so that he bawled her out, and that was the last time she got on a tractor. But she'd work with horses.
Can you describe your relationship with her?
She was the best mother. She was a good cook. She was patient, very considerate, motherly, I would say. When we were sick, she'd walk the floor with us all night or stay with us, up with us all night. She was very enduring and patient and understanding. When we had kids, she would be an available babysitter 24 hours a day. She was just the best grandmother there ever was to our kids.
How did she cope with hard times?
Oh, she cried sometimes and worked harder, I guess. That always helped her. Like a German says, Arbeit macht das Leben süß, and it really worked for my mother. Work makes life sweet. That was our Germans from Russia motto, and she really believed that. You just work harder and overcome your burdens that way.
Right. And what year was it when she passed away?
In 2001. She spent her last 7 years in the nursing home, but she lived in her own house in Golden Valley and took care of herself until 1994.
Did she ever learn to speak English very well?
Oh, yes. She learned to speak English and write. She was a very intelligent woman. They have a very good educational system in Germany. And she learned from us kids doing our homework. And my dad would make us read our lessons to him every night before we went to bed. And that's how I'm so glad I learned German. I learned High German from my mother and the Schwäbisch dialect from my dad. And it's come so in handy when I go to Germany to Mom's relatives, I can use the High German. And when I visit my dad's relatives, I use their style of German, which is Schwäbisch. And then in North Dakota, we kind of have our own dialect again too, but it's mostly Schwäbisch. So I'm so happy I learned that from my parents. And when we started school, we'd come home and the parents would make us talk English and teach them English. So it wasn't long, and my mother was ordering things out of Montgomery Ward catalog, and my dad was reading English newspapers and kept up on current events. My mother too. They both kept up on current events and took an interest in what was going on in the world and so on.
All right. Is there anything else you would like to add about your parents?
Oh, I could go on for weeks, I suppose, but where do you stop? I didn't appreciate my heritage so much then when I was a teenager. Like during World War II, you didn't want anyone to know you were a German because we were the enemy and we were all Nazis and spies, and it was very difficult. Some of the kids, I know I taught a rural school for 4 years too after I got out of high school, and even then some of the kids had a little trouble with English. But we were forbidden to speak German in school, and some of the kids couldn't speak anything but German when they started school, so I felt very sorry for them because they were punished for speaking German, and it wasn't their fault. That's just the way it was. But when I taught school, I was always very lenient because I could understand what they were trying to say and so on. But it was bad during World War II, growing up as a German.
What else do you remember about World War II?
Well, we had things were rationed, like sugar, tires, gasoline. There were different stamps. In fact, I still have a ration book over there with some of the stamps, and you got so many stamps, and when they were gone, you did without until you got your next one. And farmers got a little more gasoline and tires than town people because they had to drive to town and take their things to market. So they got by a little bit better. Of course, we had to have, more gas or tires, but they patched up their tires as best they could and cut down their trips. And we're getting back to that with gas being so high priced. Maybe we'll have to start saving a little bit again. We're kind of getting back to that era a little bit more all the time. Things are shutting down a little more, different things. And I remember we collected toothpaste tubes, and shaving cream used to come in those tin tubes, and sell war bonds and stamps. Every Friday was stamp day in school, and we had little albums, and when we got $18.75 or whatever it was in stamps, then we could trade it in for a bond. And in fact, I just cashed one of those in not long ago, and it's surprising how much they grew if you just put them away and forget about them for 30, 40 years. they did accumulate quite a bit of interest. Well, we did without a lot of things too in those days during World War II, but having gone through the dirty 30s, it wasn't a hardship. We knew how to survive. And of course, we rolled bandages for the service hospitals and collected money for the Red Cross, and people were patriotic. That was supposed to be the big one that would end all wars. And how many wars have we had since then? Korea, Vietnam, Iraq. It didn't end all the wars. I wish it had.
Is there anything else you remember about World War II?
Oh, yeah. Where do I start with that, too? I know you asked me one big question, and there's so many answers for it, and I can't think of any of them right now. But I was a teenager then. And I remember all the guys going away to the service. A few women from our neighborhood did, but not too many. A lot of the women went out west to work as welders in the shipyards and plane factories. And so the women had to work harder at home and do the jobs the men usually did. And a lot of things we had to do without. Like I say, this rationing was on. Things were kind of not as good a quality. They were not made as well as they were before that. Didn't last as long. And it seems like that trend continues today yet. Because I suppose some things were scarce, and so many of the factories went to producing ammunition and war machines and stuff like that. They were converted into making war stuff. So it was hard to get a lot of things. And in the stores, there was a lot of things you would have liked to buy, like in the foods line, but you couldn't get. But it was no real hardship, I wouldn't say, not that way.
All right, can you please tell me the birth order of your siblings?
Well, my brother William was first. He was born in 1924. My sister Leona was born in 1926. I was born in 1928. And my younger brother Rudy was born in 29.
Have you ever heard an interesting story about any of their births?
My sister said she remembers when our younger brother Rudy was born. I don't. She remembers that we kids all had to, I don't know, go outside or stay in the kitchen while things were going on in the bedroom, and she heard Mom holler, I guess, and a baby cry, and there was a baby. We had no idea where it came from. They always told us the stork brought him. And we believed it. Now kids know more about it than their parents do.
Right. Can you tell me about your brothers and sister?
Well, my brother was the best mechanic ever. He could just listen to a machine and tell you what was not quite right or what was wrong. Or he puttered with machines ever since I can remember. And when he was a little guy, before he could walk, where they had the scrap yard in the farmyard, my mom said he would crawl over there amongst all the scrap iron, and she always knew where to find him. That's where he would hang out all the time. And he was just a natural-born mechanic. And he ended up having a big construction company with all kinds of big machines, and he got a start by being able to buy something that was not working anymore, and he could take it apart and put it back together and make it work like new, and that's how he got a start. And he ended up having a big construction company, a Lindemann Construction Company. And my sister, she was always a true farm girl. She still lives out in the farm by herself, still has chickens and ducks and geese. And she's also into a lot of organizations, and like I say, she calls herself a farmer, but all she does is sleep out there. She gets real mad when I say that. But she won't leave her place overnight because she says she doesn't have a key for the door, and she's got to feed her poultry. She doesn't have cattle anymore. She had 4 kids. And my youngest brother died at an early age. He was only 48. He was the farmer in the family, and a very good farmer. He had a lot of cattle, nice cattle, and did a lot of grain farming. And he died suddenly, which was very hard on my mother, because that was her baby.
Did you all get along well while you were growing up?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did. My younger brother and I, we kind of stuck together, and my older brother and sister, they kind of stuck together. Yeah, we had to do a lot of things together.
Was there any competition in the family?
Yeah, by what do you mean by that? By attention? Competition for attention or whatever?
Sure.
Yeah, I think like all siblings do. I know my sister and I, we still have that sibling rivalry, one trying to outdo the other one, or I don't know, I guess it's the way sisters get along sometimes.
What kinds of mischief did you and your siblings get into when you were growing up?
Oh, golly, we got lickings for some things we got into. We didn't think it was anything bad, but of course it probably was, because well, we had to make our own play. We didn't have a lot of toys, so like on Sunday afternoons we'd ride the calves and play rodeo, and probably do some daring things we shouldn't have done, or get up on the roof of the barn, and or climb the windmill tower, and do scary things that parents get pretty upset over.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your siblings?
No, I guess I better not. No, as a rule, we had a good time and kind of looked out for each other and helped each other out, and none of us ever strayed too far from home. We all stayed in or close to Golden Valley. We never had any desire to go anywhere else because we were pretty close.
Okay. Well then, let's switch topics just a little bit. And can you tell me about where you went to school when you were growing up?
Well, I spent all 8 years in a country rural school in a one-room schoolhouse without electricity or bathroom facilities. We had to use the outhouse. And we went to one school at first. It was east of our place, or west, I should say, about 2.5 miles. We usually walked it unless the weather was very bad. Then Dad took us with a team of horses and a sleigh. And when there was a blizzard, we liked going to school. My mother always pushed education. She realized how important it was, and we didn't. My sister and I would take off on our own when there was a blizzard, when they said you can't go to school today, and how they must have worried. We just took off and went to school. The boys didn't care. They'd have just as soon stayed home. But I remember when the weather was real bad, my oldest brother would usually walk in the front of the line with his lunchbox up on his shoulder, and the next one right behind him with the head against him. And I was the third one. I'd have my head against my sister, and then my younger, we walked in a line like that, and he kind of shielded us from the worst part of it. And the first 4 years, I believe, I went to that school west of our place. And then that school closed, and we went to a school east of our place. That was also 2.5 miles from home. We always had a long ways to go. And in the spring, Dad would give us a team of horses. He was breaking in, and he says, you kids drive to school with a wagon and the horses so they get used to wearing a harness and so on. We had so many runaways, I became deathly scared of horses, especially a team of horses, because one time the horses came home without the wagon or the kids, and Mom just worried herself sick, so Dad had to go out and find out what happened to us. And we went cross country. There wasn't even a road the shortest way. So he found the wagon against some rocks way up north of the place, and then he came on to school, and we had walked the rest of the way. We were still alive anyway. I went 8 years in a country school, and all us kids did, and then high school in Golden Valley.
Can you tell me about some of your grade school teachers?
Yes. Well, my first few years in school, I had a man teacher. That was a little different, although men were teaching school in those days. And then I had lady teachers after that. And the first year I taught school, I was 18, and I taught 2 of the kids that I'd gone to school with. But they respected that. They didn't take advantage of the fact that I was once one of them, and they're very good about it. And that's when the winters were so bad, we had to stay in the schoolhouse. We'd string up a wire in one corner and put up a bed sheet or blanket and have our little cot back there and take food along for the week, and we would have to sleep there. No telephone or electricity. And we'd have to keep the potbelly stove going all night, and the mice would nibble at our food, and the coyotes were howling on the prairie, and no telephone or anything. How our mothers must have worried, but that's what all us teachers did. It was just done, and then if we wanted to go home for the weekend, the roads were blocked, we'd walk. I know one time I walked 6 miles to get home for the weekend. In a blizzard yet.
Can you tell me what subjects you were taught in grade school?
Oh yeah, it was basically reading and writing and arithmetic. We had geography. I liked that real well, and I still do. I liked history. We had hygiene and spelling, reading, penmanship. Later on, agriculture. That was when I was in high school.
What was your favorite class?
I think geography and reading, I liked that, and spelling. What I didn't like was arithmetic, or math, they call it now. I wasn't too crazy about that.
All right.
We had English too. I didn't mention that, did I?
Could you speak English when you went to school?
Enough to get by. I learned it from my older brother and sister because they had already gone to school, and I learned it from them.
Were you allowed to speak German in your school?
Not when World War II started, no. I was I was just about through grade school then. Before that, well, we wanted to be smart and talk English, so we tried not to talk German, but it wasn't because we had to. But the teachers encouraged it because we were learning, all the subjects were in English, so we had to know what we were talking about. So, but we weren't punished for it.
Were there any children of other ethnicities in your school?
No, most of them were German. Maybe a Norwegian here and there, but not very often. It was a German-Russian community, and that's what most of them were.
Right. What was the attendance situation like in your school?
Well, there were usually all 8 grades in one room, and I suppose the average number of pupils was 14, 15, 16. Sometimes more, sometimes there was 22 in one room and all 8 grades and one teacher.
Did students ever have to stay home to help with work?
Oh yes, a lot of people. At first, when rural school, when I first went, it was 7 months. The rest of the time they needed the kids at home in the fall and early in the spring. And then school was 8 months long, and now it's 9 months long, but there aren't many rural schools left. So I don't know what their policy is, probably 9 months also.
Right. Did you have a lot of homework?
We had some, but not as what I hear kids nowadays having 3-4 hours a night. No, we didn't have that much. Of course, discipline was better in school. We had no study halls as such, but since there were so many grades, you did your work while that grade was doing their reading or their spelling class or whatever. So we usually had time in school to do it. And if we had some in the evening, we usually did. We'd have to do it around the kitchen table with a kerosene lamp in the middle. And our parents tried to help us as much as they could, like when there was a difficult math problem. They knew how to solve it, but they couldn't show it on paper because they knew what the answer was, but we had to show it on paper, and that's what we had a problem with sometimes. Like if you had a written problem, you know.
Were you a good student?
Oh yes, I was valedictorian in my high school class. I liked school. I really did.
So what was your favorite memory about grade school?
Oh, I think the Christmas programs, because we prepared for them, and it was such a big thing. The parents and the whole neighborhood came, and Santa Claus came, and we got bags of treats, and it was a big thing.
Can you tell us more about the Christmas programs?
Yeah, they usually string a wire from one side of the schoolroom to the other and hang bed sheets on safety pins, and they could open them, close them, and we all put on our best dresses, and our parents always told us to speak our parts good and loud and to sing loud, and we had to say our parts over and over. Same with the Christmas program. Of course, that was usually in German. We had to say our parts to our parents every night until we had them down pat, and well, we had Christmas trees with real candles on them, and somebody had to have a pail of water or two there just in case. Fire started. We usually made our own decorations for the tree, and Santa Claus would come with this bag of treats. Everybody got a treat, and it was a big community social event to have the Christmas program. And of course, the only lighting we had was by kerosene lanterns that they would hang from the ceiling.
Right. What kinds of activities did you do during recess?
Well, in the summertime, we played Andy I Over, where we'd have two sides, one on either side of the schoolhouse, and we'd roll the ball over the roof, and the other side, if they caught it, they'd come around both sides and try to tag us. And when you threw the ball, rolled the ball over the roof, you said, "Andy I Over," so they knew the ball was coming. And we played hide and seek with a few places we had to hide in the schoolyard. There was usually a barn there and outhouses, and if there was a ditch nearby, you could hide there. And we played marbles a lot. That was a fun thing to do, playing marbles. And we'd play for keeps sometimes, and somebody went home bawling because they lost their favorite marble, and our mothers made us drawstring bags to carry the marbles in. That was a big thing. And we played ball a lot, bat and ball we called it. Played that a lot. And outdoor games like Pum Pum Pull Away and Simon Says, and we choose sides and usually have competition there. In the wintertime, we would push the desks to one side and probably play marbles, draw with chalk. We'd draw a pot and play marbles. Or play games on the blackboard like Hangman, you know, where you guess a letter and try to make a word before you hang the guy, and that was a lot of fun. Or I Spy we would play. Or word games.
Right. What did you bring to school for lunch?
Peanut butter sandwiches, jelly sandwiches. If we had sausage for supper the night before, some of that homemade bratwurst, we would take some of that. We always had a piece of fruit, like an apple or an orange. Mom would make cookies. We'd have a cookie or two. And Mom always made sure we had a bottle of hot cocoa to take to school. We broke a lot of bottles, but she'd buy another one, and she always wanted us to have some hot cocoa. And sometimes we'd have to carry our own water, and there were no plastic jars or bottles in those days, so we used a glass quart jar. If we'd walk by a rock and it would hit the rock and break the jar, there we'd be without water all day. And some of the other kids that had their water out in the entryway, we'd sneak out sometimes and take a sip out of that because it was a long day without a drink of water.
Right.
And one other thing we had for lunch that kids don't hear of now anymore. Cracklings was what was left over when they used to render lard from the fat they cut from the pig when they butchered. They would cut that into little cubes and fry it and render the lard from it. And what was left over was the cracklings. And Mom would put a little salt on them and grind them up, and it was just nutty like peanut butter. We liked that really well, but that's why I got clogged arteries now. We had peanut butter sometimes too, or even goose lard. They'd spread that on bread, and I guess we ate it because we were hungry. I can't say that we relished it, but when you're hungry, you eat most anything. So some kids had blood sausage, which really turned me off, but they loved it. They were used to it. We never made blood sausage, but we ate liver sausage. Head cheese.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about grade school?
Well, we were so anxious to go to school because this was the only way we saw our friends and interacted with other people, other kids. Now kids go to school because they have to, and but we loved school because we didn't see these things on TV. We read about all these great places and books, and and interesting people and so on, because that was our only source of information. So I guess we were anxious to learn.
All right. Anything else about grade school?
Oh, I suppose there's lots of things I could tell you about grade school, but like I say, where do you stop? It was a fun experience. It was an education in itself, growing up as a farm kid and going to a rural school. Because you were with all ages of kids. It wasn't just your age group, you know, so you knew how they were thinking, and you helped the little ones along when they first started, and you helped each other out.
All right. Can you tell me how important religion was during your childhood?
Well, it was quite important. I think that's what kept a lot of those people to stay and put up with what they put up with. It was their faith and their trust in God that things would get better. It was very important. Usually one of the first things they built was a church, or they met in people's homes until they could get together and build a church or could afford it. It was very important to them, as it was in Russia for the German families. That held them together, I guess, their belief in God, that he was looking out for them and was in charge and things would get better.
What denomination were you raised?
I was a Lutheran. I still am.
How often did your family go to church?
Well, we had church every Sunday. When the roads were blocked and so on, I'm sure we missed some Sundays, but we tried to get there when we could. We lived quite a distance from church. We went to a church west of our place, about 5-6 miles on a road that wasn't as well traveled as the road to town. But in later years, we joined the church in town then, because lightning struck that church and burned it down. So it was replaced with another one, but by that time we started going to church in Golden Valley.
Can you describe the building where you went to church?
Well, they were all kind of built on the same pattern, the Germans from Russia churches. The front door always faced to the east, to the rising sun. They had a steeple with a bell in the bell tower. They usually had arched windows. With the altar, usually there were stained glass windows behind the altar, beside the altar. And they were pews. They didn't have cushions on them in those days. They were just the regular church pews. A lot of them had the tin embossed panels in the walls, which I think were beautiful, and a lot of them were destroyed later on. Now they probably wish they had them. But the church in Golden Valley, where I grew up, that still has the ceiling in the embossed tin, and I know the church at Dodge does too, on the sides too, and I think Zapp does too. So they were all pretty much built on the same pattern.
All right. Were your sermons in English or in German?
Oh, they were always in German to begin with, and then later years they had English and German. And now you can't find many German preachers anymore, although for our Germans from Russia Music Fest we still have one, a Pastor Zern from Hazen, that's retired, but he'll still preach in German and then translate it into the English. So we try to please everybody.
Right.
But I learned the catechism. I was confirmed in German. I was one of the last classes that were confirmed in German. There was a few years after that, and that was it. Now it's all English.
Can you tell me about confirmation classes?
Yes, they were very strict. We usually had them steady for, I don't know, was it 4 or 5 weeks in the summertime? Now kids go once a week for a few hours during the school year. But we had like Vacation Bible School. We went the whole stretch at one time. But we had Sunday school every Sunday. And it was just taught by our pastor always, taught confirmation school. And they were very strict. I saw the rod used on several of the boys that tried to pull funnies. Because it was considered a very serious thing, more so than it is now. And we really took it very seriously. I mean, if you didn't go to a dance during Lent, you wouldn't even think of going to a dance, where kids don't seem to care much now anymore, whether it's Lent or not.
Did you have a big ceremony when you were confirmed?
Oh yeah, we all got new white dresses, and I got my first perm when I was confirmed, because that was kind of a big affair. The boys all got new suits, as a rule. We all got a German hymnal from our parents with our names embossed on them in gold. That was usually a standard confirmation gift. And then our godparents were invited to the house for dinner, and maybe some of the other neighbors. It was a big thing.
Right. When you were growing up, were you able to question religious teachings?
No, it's just what the Bible said. That was it. What's there to question?
Were there any restrictions placed on you by your parents because of religion?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We couldn't have what you call dates, even at 16, it was frowned on, and you just didn't do some of the things that kids do nowadays that are accepted by the parents and society. And nobody else did either, so you thought nothing of it. You didn't think you were deprived.
How did your family view people of other faiths?
Well, there were Lutherans all around us. To the west, there were some Catholic families, but intermarriage was still a bad thing when I was growing up, which it isn't now anymore. Intermarriage between different faiths. I'd say it was more serious than it is nowadays.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about religion when you were growing up?
Well, we took it more seriously, as I said, and it was more in reverence and what other word could I use? It was holier or something to us. It hit you here more than it seems to do for people now.
Right. Okay. I'm going to ask you a couple questions about holidays. Which was your favorite when you were growing up?
Oh, Christmas, of course.
Why was Christmas your favorite?
Well, we got a new dress, and we got presents maybe, and we still believed in Santa Claus, and there were candy and nuts. We finally could eat our fill. There was boxes of oranges and apples and books handless, St. John's bread and figs and dates and cookies by the cream cans full. Mom would just bake the cream cans full of cookies, and there was just more of all that stuff, and people getting together and visiting, and the Christmas programs, and there was a lot of special things about it.
Can you tell me what St. John's bread is?
Yes, I think it's a carob pod that grows on a tree in probably Arabian countries. That's where I always think it comes from. And it's about this long, and it's kind of curved like, and it's got seeds in it, big seeds like beans almost. We always called it bukshendle, which means the horns on a little sheep buck or something, because that's what they look like. But they are almost black, they're dark. And in English they call it St. John's bread, so don't ask a German where that came from. But it was something you could chew on all day and not get anywhere. It was just slow eating because they were dried pods of some kind, but they had a good flavor. You still see it here at the store once in a while at Christmas time. But we always had some of that. Must have been a delicacy from the old country yet.
You mentioned Santa Claus. Would he come to your house?
Oh yes, I saw one time where he dragged his sack from across the kitchen floor and out the window. Must have been during the dirty 30s when there was dust on the floor all the time. And I still remember those marks where that sack was dragged across the kitchen floor. And my sister and I, when that Christmas catalog came, it was just worn out by the time Christmas came, and my sister and I had wanted this nice dollhouse that was in there. And I remember it was during the dirty 30s, and it was a 2-story dollhouse with all the wooden furniture in it, just beautiful. And my mother says it costs $1.98, and that's a lot of money. We just don't have that much money. Well, we believed Santa Claus would bring it, you know, what's money got to do with it? And sure enough, on Christmas morning, we had that dollhouse. And the neighbor kids and we played with that and played with it and played with it. It was just the greatest toy I remember ever getting. And my brothers, my dad had made them car sheds, we called them, garages out of apple boxes. And I remember him working late at night, and then he'd get to the last piece of it, and then the apple box wood would break in two, and he'd have to start over again, and sweat was pouring off his brow, and he painted them, and then he'd get a little car for him to drive in that car shed, you know. And I still have the doll cradle he made for me one year out of apple box wood.
Did your family have a Christmas tree?
Yes, it wasn't very big because we lived in a little 2-room house. I think it sat on the table. It was an artificial one, and the branches were on wires that would fold up, and we would unfold each one and hang these little ornaments on it.
Where did you get the ornaments?
I don't know, we must have bought them at one time or another before I could remember, but every year Mom would get that box out of the attic and have these ornaments, and they were beautiful.
Is there anything else you remember about Christmas?
Well, the programs and the visiting and the food, and it was great. Yeah, it was nice.
Right. Did your family celebrate Easter?
Oh yes, yes. It was Lent and then Easter. That was kind of a big holiday too. With the Easter eggs, we had lots of eggs. You know, Mom used to dye like 5, 6 dozen, I think. And there was no refrigeration. I think they sat on a bowl on the table for 2 weeks, and we still ate them. We didn't get sick. They were still good. Now you can't keep them out of the refrigerator longer than 2 hours, or you're supposed to throw them. Oh, we never got salmonella or anything like that. Food was just pure then, I guess.
How did you dye them?
Well, we usually bought dye at the store, but my dad showed us how they used to dye eggs in Russia. He would take skins from onions and steep them in hot water, and that made the nice golden brown eggs. And then he would mix coffee grounds with hot water and dyed some a nice chocolatey color. And then we had coloring for the butter that was a bright yellow. Put a few drops of that in water, and then we'd have yellow eggs. Red ones, I don't know if they used beet juice or if we just didn't have red eggs. I just don't remember that. But then we usually had dye from the store, and that was a great thing to dye Easter eggs. We basically had blue and red and yellow.
Right.
Primary colors. And we were satisfied with that. Now they got to have marble eggs, picture eggs, everything. Everything but old-fashioned Easter eggs.
Did you have to have Easter baskets or nests built?
Yeah, a lot of times we planted oats in a pie pan that made nice tall grass, and the eggs would be laying in there. We had baskets too, yes. I can't say that we ever had an Easter egg hunt. I don't remember that we did like they do now. But Mom would usually make an Easter bread that was very, very good. They called it baska in Russian. And in German it was Osterbrot. That was always good. And she made cookies and...
Right. Is there anything else you remember about Easter when you were growing up?
We usually got new dresses, or Mom made us new dresses. I don't remember that we had Easter sunrise services when I was a little kid. I guess everybody was milking cows then yet, and it just didn't work out. But we always had church on Easter. And Lent was observed very strictly too. You kind of just slowed down and concentrated on what Christ went through for you and so on. It was a very serious time. That was 6 weeks before Easter. So then we had Lenten services sometimes. Now we do on Wednesday nights. I didn't remember church in the evening so much because there was no electricity and so on.
Right. Well, you mentioned this briefly before, but can you tell us more about how your family celebrated the 4th of July?
Like I say, it was a big holiday for my dad. Well, all the old-timers, they really thought a lot of the 4th of July, and I always thought, well, how patriotic of them. There was usually a speaker in town, maybe a politician or an entertaining speaker, and or there were ball games somewhere. Or we all went up to the river and the men went fishing and the women put out a big picnic lunch and we kids just had a great time playing in the mud and the sand and swimming and things like that. Or maybe there was a carnival in a town somewhere. That carnivals used to be very popular. And everybody had a great time, and now they're kind of starting to shut down because there's not enough people around anymore. They can't make it anymore.
Did you ever have firecrackers?
Oh yes, we had cherry bombs. We had all the big stuff. Nothing was outlawed. It's a miracle we didn't blow ourselves to kingdom come. But I remember I ran from my younger brother one time. He had a cherry bomb, and I jumped into a barrel and he threw that thing in there and I thought I'd never hear again. I didn't hear for days, but my hearing is still good. Maybe it opened up things and it's better than ever. Oh, and we used to put them under tin cans and hide them in the craziest places. It's a miracle we didn't blow everything up. They had powerful ones then.
Right. Is there anything else you remember about the 4th of July?
No, those are pretty much the basic things, I think.
Right.
If we just had a picnic or went fishing, that was a great thing for us too.
Okay. Did your family celebrate any other holidays like Thanksgiving or New Year's?
Yeah, Thanksgiving, usually, have a big meal and think on your blessings for the past year. New Year's, that was kind of a young people's thing. I mean, they would go from farm to farm and rap at the bedroom window. This was during the night, late at night, and they'd have a little poem they'd say about wishing you good luck and so forth in the new year, and then they would usually have a shotgun with them, and they'd shoot up into the air, as they'd say this, and of course they'd wake everybody in the house up. So then the master of the house would have to come and give them a drink of whiskey or invite them in for a little lunch, but they'd make the whole round of the neighborhood, the young guys, and they thought that was great fun. They had some cute little poems that went with it, and they were usually in German.
Right. How about Valentine's Day?
Oh, in school we always had a Valentine box that we made and decorated very nicely, and everybody would bring Valentines and put them in the box, and at the end of the day we'd have a little party, maybe cookies and nectar, if you know what that is. They call it Kool-Aid now. Nectar, and maybe the kids would bring treats or the teacher would, and then we'd have a little party and open the Valentine box, and the older kids got to distribute all the Valentines to everybody, and sometimes a kid that wasn't well liked was left out, and it's not very nice. But we usually exchanged Valentines with everybody. We kids got along good. There weren't many bullies in those days. Very seldom that there was a bully in school. They'd get the whipping of their life when they got home, and anybody told on them. So.
Right. Did your family celebrate birthdays?
Oh yeah, we usually made homemade ice cream, and Mom would make a cake for us, and maybe some of the neighbors would come over for a visit and a little lunch, and yeah, birthdays were pretty well observed.
How did you make ice cream?
Well, we had a crank freezer. You would go to the stock tank or wherever you could find some ice, put it in a gunny sack and hit it with a hammer to chop it up into smaller pieces. And then we would use salt to make it melt a little yet and make the water colder without freezing it. And you packed that in around your container, which sat in the middle. And in that container you had cream and eggs and vanilla and sugar. Maybe you wanted to color it a little bit with food color or make different flavors of ice cream, chocolate, put a little cocoa in it. And then you would put that liquid in that inside container, and you would keep turning this handle. There was a paddle in there, kept it from getting crystally. And you turn it until it was so stiff you couldn't hardly turn it, and then the ice cream was ready. And oh, that was good. Now that was a big treat.
Did you ever get gifts for your birthday?
Oh yeah, we always got something, even if Mom knit us a pair of mittens, or a color book was a great thing with me. I like color books, or a new box of crayons, or a little toy of some kind, never anything expensive.
Right. Do you remember anything else about holidays or celebrations when you were growing up?
Oh, like I say, we'd celebrate them in school and celebrate them at home and in the neighborhood, and holidays were a big excuse to get together, socialize.
What was it like growing up as a German-Russian kid?
Like I said, it wasn't easy. I mean, our self-esteem went way down when we got to town because we were the Russian kids. And we were so anxious for them to like us. When they come up and ask us to share our candy with them, we just hand it all to them, thinking now they're going to be our friends. And the minute they'd walk away, they'd call us Russians again. So we learned the hard way that way. And I guess it was more dissension between the town kids and the farm kids than because they were as Russian as we were. We had a Jewish family live in Golden Valley for a time. He had a store up there. Every town along the line had a Jewish merchant at one time or another. And they had a daughter that went to high school when I did, and we teased her just mercilessly, terrible. I apologized to her many years later, and she's, oh, forget it. I was used to that. But we were really hard on her because she was a Jew. And it's racism is what we'd call it now. I'm ashamed to think of how we... But then we were teased that way because we were Germans, so I knew what she felt like. I mean, I do now, I didn't then. So it wasn't too easy during World War II.
Right.
And we had to work hard, not because we were German Russian, but that was our life, that we were living on a farm. But we learned, being raised on a farm was a great education. We learned all about life, where babies come from, how plants grow, how things reproduce, and different types of soils, rocks, so many things we learned that the town kids, I don't know why I ever envied them, because education-wise we were ahead of them that way.
Right. Is there anything else you want to share with us about growing up a farm kid or a German Russian kid?
Oh, well, not necessarily that I was German Russian, but growing up as a farm kid was a great education. I mean, we learned how to fix different things, make them do, you know, what could be wrong with something, and you learn to be self-sufficient and independent a little bit more, and persevere.
What about health care? Did you ever go to a doctor?
Oh, only if we were at death's door. My mother worried us through all that. Dad always said, oh, they'll be all right, and we usually were.
Did your parents have home remedies for illnesses?
Oh, yes, there were home remedies, and if you didn't have one, the neighbor lady sure did. You take this for that, and put a cold cloth on the head for that, and jump up and down for that. They had a remedy for everything because they had to sometimes. There was...
Do you remember any of them specifically?
Well, there was something they bought at the store. It was called Alpenkreider. It was in a bottle. I suppose it had a little alcohol in it. That's why they felt so good when they took it. But they took that for everything, I remember. Alpenkreider, it was called. Alpen comes from the mountains, Alp mountains, and Kreider, I don't know, it must be something that'll heal you. And they used horse liniment for a lot of things, for aches and pains. Vicks was a old standby product. Castor oil, mineral oil, baking soda for upset stomach. Oh, and then they would mix lard with sulfur, and that was good for scabies or the 7-year itch or whatever. I remember they used that. There was usually women in a community that were good at telling you what to do for what. And they had a lot of different teas and brews, and the Indians even had a few about rattlesnake tea or whatever. Different herbs they used from the prairie, and different berries and roots, and or warm horse manure for a poultice that would draw the poison out of an inflamed or infected wound, you know, they used that. Or flaxseed in a cloth was good for, what did they use that for, pneumonia or whatever. A lot of home remedies. You had to be very sick before you went to a doctor. It had to look pretty hopeless. Say we were the dentist, you didn't go till you had a toothache. Then it was too late. Well, then they pulled them out and thought nothing of it. Now they try to save teeth. Mm.
All right. Can you tell me about your experiences at high school?
Oh, it was a fun time. But still we had to go home and do chores in the evening and in the morning. And I went all 4 years in Golden Valley. And when I started as a freshman, I think there were 16 of us. And by the time I graduated, there was 4 of us girls. It was an all-girl class. The first one since 1932, I think. We had 2 teachers in high school then, a man and his wife. We had the first year, I guess, the second year. And then we had 2 female teachers, 2 sisters. We called them Pat and Mike. We played a lot of tricks on them. Like if it was a cold day and the old schoolhouse was kind of hard to heat, and when both teachers were out of the room, the boys would open up all the windows and reach out on the ledge and grab a handful of snow and put it against the thermometer on the wall, and the teachers would come back in the room and say, "Oh my, it's cold in here. I think we'll have to dismiss for the day." And it worked every time. They never called. So that's one of the tricks the boys play. We used to play a lot of tricks just to see what we could get by with. We were all close in high school. It was one for all and all for one, and made some lifetime friends in high school. Of course, we knew all the kids. Then the town kids and the farm kids mixed pretty well. There was none of this dissension anymore about the Russian farm kids and the Russian town kids. We were more on an equal basis, I think. And we had basketball games. We didn't have a gym then, so we played down at the community hall with a row of seats on each side, and you could get bopped on the head with the basketball or end up with a basketball player in your lap if somebody slipped. It was kind of a harrowing time to go to a basketball game, but we went anyway. And we always rooted for the home team, and I was in the pep club. We didn't have uniforms, but we had organized yells and made up a lot of our own, and we weren't always on the winning end. I don't think we ever were while I was in high school, but the spirit was there anyway. We still cheered for our guys. And for Phi Ed, we didn't have a girls' team as for competition. We did play amongst ourselves, and we played boys' rules because the girls' rules were so restricted. You could only use half of the court, and it was no fun, so we played. We thought, heck, we were hauling rocks out in the farm and pitching bales. What's to keep us from playing a regular game of basketball? They used to say, every basketball game will take 10 years off your life. Well, we should have all been dead by that time, but they never said anything about hard farm work, that they'd take anything off your life. So we had history, world history, old world history, U.S. history. Of course, we didn't have as much history to study yet as kids do now. I feel sorry for the kids unless they leave all that old stuff behind, like the Roman and Greek gods. I often wondered why we learned all that anyway. They weren't real. Like I said, I hated grammar, but I loved literature. Although Shakespeare, I wondered oftentimes, why are we studying about Shakespeare? And I still don't know why, really. There's better stuff than that, I think. Don't tell Shakespeare I said that. Let's see. We had agriculture, of course. That's where we farm kids really shone. We knew that without having to read about it. Driver's ed, just the book learning part. We didn't have didn't have a student ed car to drive with. We all knew how to drive anyway. It's just some of the rules we didn't know. We made up our own rules, I guess. Science, general science, we had that. I liked that real well. Learned a lot of new things. Things I even think of so many times now. We didn't have a lab to work in, but we used to play with the mercury, roll it around, and probably all got mercury poisoning, but we're still here. We took it pretty seriously, and there weren't as many discipline problems as there are now, or dropouts, or skipping school. Truancy wasn't a problem. I think we were like grade school. We were glad to get together with our friends and interact with them.
Covered a lot of stuff. Is there anything else about high school that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I never really had a good English teacher, and I still have trouble with sentence structure and proper use of grammar, but I got along this long, and I think I'll make it the rest of the way in spite of all that.
All right. Is there anything else about high school?
A lot of things I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. Well, in that case...
Oh, I took typing too, and we had a library. Not as big as what they have now, not as new and as up to date, but no computers, no calculators. It was all done up in the head.
Did you like to read when you were growing up?
Oh yes, I still love to read.
What were some of your favorite books as a child?
Oh, Heidi and the what were those girls called? I like the Rover Boys, and what were those girls? They were always solving mysteries. Can't think of their names now. I liked any mystery, or I liked, I think Heidi was about my favorite. I love that, and I've seen in movies. Cinderella and all those stories, I liked them real well. When I got older, I liked... The Grapes of Wrath, and How Green Was My Valley, and a lot of the classics I liked, those that were not too difficult to understand. If I thought of this before, I would have come up with some better titles probably, but we had a lot of required reading in those days and had to write the book reports. I think they still do that. We had a lot of memory work to do, especially in grade school. We had to memorize a lot of poems. And in confirmation, had to memorize so many hymns and psalms and Bible verses, more so than they do now. And I was thankful for that. That's when the brain was absorbent yet, and it really, you just read it once or twice and you knew it. Now you can't get it in there if you tried all week. So you got to do it when you're young, before the brain gets too full of stuff.
Right? Can you tell me what your most stressful childhood memory was?
Oh, there were a lot of them, my dear. I don't know which one I would pick out as the most stressful one. I guess I worried along with my parents during the dirty 30s because the rains weren't coming and the grasshoppers were bad and times were bad. I guess I worried along with them for that. Or if the winters were so bad that you were snowed in for weeks at a time, and you just worried about the things they worried about, like the cattle and are we going to have enough money to pay the taxes, and just the usual things that we worried about at that time. We worried along with our parents because we heard them talking about it, so it became serious to us too. And then after you grow up, all you worry about is your hair and looks and clothes and boys and stuff like that. That perked them up.
All right. Can you share with me your happiest childhood memory?
Well, I suppose like Christmas and when we got something that we had waited for a long time, a certain pair of shoes or toy or dress, or went someplace out of the county even, like to Bismarck. That was a once-a-year trip maybe, not that often. That was a big treat. Little things made us happy in those days.
Right. What was the most adventurous thing you did when you were a child?
Adventurous thing. Oh, riding horseback was a big adventure. A carnival was a big adventure. All those rides, and they'd have wild animals and people that were half woman and half man, and oh my goodness, they had so many things that were probably not really that great, but to us they looked really great. We didn't take any trips as such, not any far trips, because we had to be home to do the chores twice a day. I don't know, just being alive was a great time, I guess. A lot of times we grumbled then, but now looking back, it all looked good. Which is as it should be, I guess. Just remember the good times.
Right. Is there anything else about your childhood you'd like to share with us?
Well, I was always a little weakling, I guess, or I got picked on a little bit by my brothers and my sister, and ha, you can't do that, and I'd say I just wasn't as strong. I was kind of a skinny little runty thing, and nothing really bad.
Right. Anything else you'd like to share?
No, I guess basically I had a pretty happy childhood, and when I look back, then I thought I was kind of overworked and underpaid and all that, but so was everybody else, so I got nothing to gripe about.
Why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
Well, I wish my parents would have had the opportunity to sit down and do this, or my grandparents, or my great-grandparents, how much it would mean to me now. And we're kind of a lost breed. Once we Germans from Russia are like this generation, there won't be any German-speaking people here anymore, or I don't know how many of our customs or foods or whatever have rubbed off on the next generation, but I'm sure it'll gradually fade out. I still call myself a first generation, although I guess I'm considered second generation Germans from Russia because my dad was here. But our breed is a diminishing breed when we're gone. I don't know if anybody will keep up preserving our heritage, although with computers now a lot of people are into genealogy and researching and our headquarters in Bismarck is acquiring more from the archives in Russia, and like I say, they really kept amazing records. I have a map of Gross Liebenthal where my dad was born, and it's got Lindemann lots marked on there, but I don't know what the name of my great-grandparents were. I think they must have lived there originally. There's several Lindemann families with the lots drawn on those maps, but I imagine they aren't there anymore, the buildings that were there before. But I did visit the church that I believe my dad went to and was baptized in Gross Liebenthal, and visited in Freidorf, the cemetery. The communists dozed down all the headstones and scattered them. They just were going to erase all signs that the Germans ever were there, although that's what developed the steppes in Russia. And I brought some soil back from that cemetery in Freidorf where my grandparents, not my grandparents, my great-grandparents are buried, that I want to put on my dad's grave here, so he's got a little of his home turf left. I haven't been able to go out there and do that because first it was so dry I couldn't dig a hole, and now it's too wet I can't dig a hole, so I gotta wait a little bit.
All right. Are there any other thoughts or observations you'd like to share with us?
Oh, my child, there's so many, but I don't know what else to cover. What haven't we talked about? Not much, huh?
Not a lot.
I'd like to tell you the story of this picture. That's my oldest brother and my sister. And they went to Hebron, which was the big town in the early days. That's 30 miles south of here. And he saw this gun in a store they went in, and he wanted it so bad. And my dad says, no, you can't have that. But his Uncle Ed, my dad's younger brother that came to America with him, was with, and he and my brother Bill were always like father and son. So he went and bought my brother this little BB gun or air rifle, whatever it is. And then they were at a photographer's there, and they decided to have the picture taken of the only two kids that were then. And he would not let go of his gun. So I think it's so cute they let him hold the gun. And my sister, I say, she was the same way back then already. She'd say, what did he need that gun for? Because that's just what she would say now. What did that kid need that gun for? She's got that look on her in her eye back then already, I said, because if you didn't need it, you shouldn't have it. That's her philosophy. Anyway, I love that picture. And this is all four of us kids. This was taken during the dirty 30s. We were at a neighbor's house. It was on the 4th of July, I believe. And my younger brother was eating watermelon that they had raised in their garden, and he would not let go of it. So he has that, holding that in the picture. And my sister and I had new dresses. Hers was blue and mine was pink, and we had hats with it. And my dad came over and took our hats off and laid them on the ground. They're down here somewhere. They don't show on this picture. Oh, here they are. And the wind was blowing so hard that day, and I kept looking at my hat's going to blow away. My hat's going to blow. I was so worried about my hat. But it didn't blow away. It rolled a little bit, but it stayed there. But I remember worrying about my hat, and I must have been all of, I don't know, 6 years old maybe 34 when it was taken. Nobody wrote the date on, so I'm not too sure. And this is my dad. I was taken when he was in the First World War. He was a handsome man. I didn't know him then yet because that's before he and my mother were married, shortly before. He was in the American Army. And this is a picture of my mother, his mail-order bride from Germany. Nice-looking woman. And a good woman. This is the only baby picture of me when I'm sitting on my dad's lap. My mother was pregnant with my younger brother, Rudy. So he's in the picture, but you can't see him. And my brother Bill and Leona. And Mom said Leona didn't have her, was barefoot and she was so dirty. She'd been playing in the dirt, but that's what she liked doing. So she was in the picture anyway, dirt and all. Doesn't really show on there. And you see the old car back there. I don't know what it is. It's not their car, I don't think, because my dad drove a Model T. This looks like something else. And it was taken at a neighbor's farm. It wasn't our farm. Here's another picture of my dad. And I don't remember if I asked Dad who the other man was or if he didn't remember, or anyway, we don't know who the other man was, but that's my dad also in his World War I uniform. This is after my dad died. That was Mother and we 4 kids. Bill, Leona, Hilda, and Rudy. This is my mom and dad standing in front of our farmhouse, the parsonage that Dad had bought and added to. This is my mother shortly after she came to America from Germany. And this is my parents in 1950. And here's my dad and my Uncle Ed when they were young bachelors yet. I wouldn't recognize either one. They changed a lot. Here's my mom and dad's wedding picture. And she had brought all her family pictures and knickknacks and wedding dress from Germany when she first came. And then in St. Paul, her trunk was sitting beside her and some woman said, let's go and get something to eat. I'll show you where you can eat. And the other woman says, I'll watch your things. And when Mom came back, everything was gone. So in retrospect, we think that might have all been put up, that they robbed these foreigners of a lot of their things by trusting and not knowing the language and so on. So she had to borrow the pastor's wife's wedding dress to get married, because they got married 10 days after she got here. This is my mom and dad out on the farm. That's kind of hard to see. This is my dad's mother, the only picture I have of my dad's mother. And this is my mom and dad on their 40th wedding anniversary. My mom on her 93rd birthday. My younger brother had already died. There was just Bill and Leona and I. Here's Mom on her 98th birthday. I made her a cake every year for her birthday, as I did for most everybody else in the family. I was always the cake baker. Here's Mom on her 90th birthday. And that's about all the pictures I dug out, I guess.